Good afternoon, members of the Lexington community. As many of you know, the Lexington High School project received strong support at the special town meeting on November 3rd, 2025, with a 91% affirmative vote to advance the project to a townwide debt exclusion election on December 8th, 2025. This video, recorded on November 6th, 2025, is part 2 of a 2-part informational series responding to frequently asked questions raised at Monday's town meeting. Part 1 focused on project finances and risk management. Part 2 focuses on design, site planning, and construction topics.
So one of the first questions asked is which fields are impacted by the construction laydown activities? We've presented kind of an overview of the site here to kind of clarify what areas will be used for construction. So the impacted fields will be the C3 baseball field, C4 ball field, the Crum football field, and the practice field / throwing area. No additional fields will be required for parking or laydown for the construction of this project. You can see clearly here kind of the phase 1 construction zone, which will be the construction of the new high school, and phase 2, which will be the demolition of the existing high school, renovation of the field house, and construction of new parking, PV arrays, and fields. All work will be performed within the site fence. The exception to this would be there will be designated work zones for utilities and site improvements for work on Park Drive, Worthing Road, and Waltham Street, in addition to the areas for the relocated skate park and throwing cage. Those will be also within site fence, but those will be for a shorter duration, just for that length of work to establish those work areas.
What are the implications if FEMA does not redraw the floodplain maps? There is no reason to believe that FEMA will not redraw the map or will deny the letter of map change submitted by the team. The application was complete. It provided accurate and sufficient data to support the establishment of a base flood elevation, and the property is eligible to request such a change. When FEMA updated the flood maps in July of 2025, their study was at a very high level and did not include site-specific flood elevation or several specific conditions that were included in the project team's flood study submitted, which included the length, size, and geometry of the Vinebrook culvert, how portions of Center Rec site tie into that culvert, including their pipe elevations and connection points to the culvert, specific watershed conditions, including topography, soil types, and surface conditions, such as land cover, specific watershed conditions of Lincoln Park, including how the wetland system provides additional storage volumes during storm events. Upon review, FEMA may request revisions to the flood study, which may have minor impacts to the extent of the floodplain area and the base flood elevation, or the height of the elevation, but will likely not change the project's mitigation strategies. We have included a link to the FEMA glossary of terms on this slide for those who want to dive deeper. So if FEMA were to deny the change or request revisions, it would be based on the data contained within the flood study, and that could mean a higher flood elevation and the area than we currently assumed. If it was to happen, the project team may need to raise the grade around the building, the site that it sits on, and its surrounding plazas, driveways, and walkways. The costs for any increase would be covered within the project contingencies. The project will still be required to comply with Article 31 of the Lexington zoning bylaws and the Wetland Protections Act, and a flood study would still be required to establish that base flood elevation. As stated, the flood study has already been completed, and it identifies the extent and the elevation of the floodplain. Currently, the proposed project's high school floor plan, the first floor elevation, is 4'8" above the flood elevation. Finally, work within the floodplain would be permitted through the Lexington Conservation Commission, including compensatory storage if required across the limit of work. The project does incorporate a small area of the floodplain based on the revised map that would include compensatory storage, and that would exist so that no loss of flood volume occurs after construction. We were asked to characterize the request from EEA regarding floodplain construction. The Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs issued a certificate after review of the expanded Environmental Notification Form, the EENF. The certificate states that if the submitted letter of map change is accepted by FEMA, the project has the proposed utility yard located within that 100-year floodplain. The project team is very aware of this and has included several mitigation measures in the project design and budget relative to the floodplain, which includes relocating an area of the floodplain away from the utility yard and the high school building, providing the compensatory storage we just discussed for that area, maintaining the piped connection to the culvert, raising the grade approximately 4'6" in the footprint of the new high school, and establishing a first floor elevation of the high school that's approximately 4.8 feet above the floodplain. We were asked why the triangle parcel across from Worthing Road was not utilized for this project. This triangle parcel, known as ID 41-120, was initially investigated by the project team, as it is town-owned and under the care, custody, control, and management of the school committee. Wetlands were flagged on the site and were included in the ORAD, the Order of Resource Area Delineation received from the Lexington Conservation Commission. In addition, the MSBA requires that Massachusetts Historical Commission, MHC, review the project, including this parcel, and through that review, it was discovered that an Indigenous archaeological site exists on the parcel. Given the extents of the wetland resources and the determination by MHC, the project team concluded there was no advantage to consider the parcel for development. That included no construction laydown or temporary parking, no permanent parking, and no realignment of Worthing Road. How is the town addressing parking issues at the existing high school? Today, there are 450 parking spaces at the high school with 0 student parking. The proposed project will include 500 parking spaces. That will remain 0 for student parking, and the additional 50 spaces will accommodate central office in the new building. The Transportation Safety Group, TSG, has been actively looking for improvements in both safety and parking in the area. Parking restrictions have been placed on Parker Street as a trial. Speed zone restrictions are in place on Worthing Road, 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, and a satellite parking at Lincoln Field is currently being explored. In addition, the project completed a traffic study. The study concluded that the proposed project will have no change on the current conditions at the 3 major intersections surrounding the school, because the volume of traffic in this area will remain unchanged. Thank you for your